CEO Daddy, Chapter 1316. With him here, she felt at ease. What a woman wanted was nothing more than a peace of mind. Alvina Miller played with all kinds of small emotions just for a man's peace of mind. Now, Joseph Grant's words made her instantly happy. It's really late. Let's go to sleep. Alvina Miller glanced at the snow falling outside the window. Her body and mind relaxed, and then fell asleep. All right. The man released his grip on her, and the woman turned and walked back to his wide bed. Raising the corner of the blanket, Alvina Miller didn't dare to lie down, because it was really cold. Joseph Grant seemed to have noticed her hesitation. He immediately walked to her side and lay down, then spread out his arm, allowing her to sleep. Alvina Miller giggled as she crawled over and got into his embrace. It was really warm. In such a quiet time, two colliding hearts were warming up together, sinking into a dream together. Alvina Miller seemed to be accustomed to having this man by her side. She did not continue to let her imagination run wild, and sweetly slept through the night. Early the next morning, Alvina Miller heard her phone ringing. She quickly got up, only to hear a muffled groan from the man next to her ear. "Why are you still here?" Alvina Miller looked at the man beside her with a little surprise. She didn't know when he had changed into an army green shirt last night as pajamas. She was very surprised to see his figure in the morning. It's only 7 o'clock. It's still early. Joseph Grant obviously didn't want to wake up. Holding her body in his arms, he slept like a hot pot. Alvina Miller acknowledged, then rubbed her eyes. "I have to get up. I still have a lot of work to do today." "All right, let's go together." The man immediately sat up, and the slightly tight t-shirt revealed his well-defined chest. Alvina Miller peeked at him with her beautiful eyes, and when she thought about how she was bored and counted the abs yesterday, her face immediately blushed red. In Joseph Grant's bathroom, there were only his personal items. Alvina Miller tactfully ran to the bathroom that belonged to her. When she was done, the man was already dressed. He was wearing a long black trench coat on the outside, giving him a noble aura and an invincible aura. Alvina Miller was also dressed in work attire, and at the moment, she was anxiously putting on the brooch that Joseph Grant had given her. She didn't know if it was because of the cold or if it was because of her hands, but she couldn't get it done even after she tried a few times. "Let me help you." With his long legs, the man walked in front of her in a few steps. His slender fingers were very good looking, with distinct joints. Moreover, he had a healthy sense of wealth and clarity. It was extremely enchanting. Alvina Miller had completely ignored the existence of the brooch as she only focused on looking at his hand. "All right." Joseph Grant was completely unaware of his gentle smile. To girls, it was extremely lethal. So when he turned around and was about to head downstairs first, a small hand suddenly grabbed his finger. Joseph Grant was startled. He looked at her with his beautiful eyes, and did not understand. A couple will hold hands wherever they go. Alvina Miller found it embarrassing to say that she wanted to hold his hand, so she found a proper reason for herself. "Is that so?" "I don't know." After hearing her words, Joseph Grant had already taken the initiative to hold her small hand. Alvina Miller's objective had been achieved, and she revealed a row of small white teeth. Her red lips and white teeth were shining brilliantly. Maybe it was used to describe her current appearance, like a child who had been fed candy. Joseph Grant was also affected by her smile, and he could not help but smile. The two of them went downstairs, and an aunt delivered breakfast to them. Joseph Grant suddenly felt his palm being pushed away by a small hand. He was startled. Alvina Miller seemed to want to keep a distance from him on purpose, and coldly placed her two small hands behind her back, her beautiful eyes looking towards the sky, not looking at him. After waiting for his aunt to place the breakfast on the table, Joseph Grant asked her with difficulty, "Why did you let go of my hand just now?" "There's no reason why. In the eyes of outsiders, don't we have to pretend to be strangers?" Alvina Miller answered him with a serious face. Joseph Grant suddenly choked. It seemed that this little woman was much better than him. "You did well," he praised her with a chuckle. Alvina Miller gritted her teeth as she ate her breakfast. After breakfast, Joseph Grant's convoy came over to pick him up and leave. Alvina Miller watched him get into the car, then turned and drove her own little sports car. Thinking that today was yet another busy day, she couldn't help but sigh. Arriving at the office, Alvina Miller met Kelly at the entrance. Kelly had actually driven a car here today. This car looked like it was newly bought, with $300,000, which was considered pretty good even among the ordinary carriages. Kelly, who was very far away, deliberately locked her car with a car key. Her car flashed a few times. Alvina Miller pouted, although she shouldn't think about where she was going to show off. The truth told her that Kelly was indeed doing it for her to see. "Nice car," Alvina Miller praised intentionally in front of her. Kelly's face became hot, and she found herself unable to hold on any longer, so she hurriedly turned around and walked forward. Alvina Miller had obviously teased her, but she was also laughing happily at this moment. If someone was showing off in front of her, she really didn't want to say anything. All she could say was that she could afford to buy anything she wanted, so she didn't envy anyone else anymore. Kelly secretly gritted her teeth as she felt that Alvina Miller's words were clearly mocking her. "Damn it, you are nothing without your money. Just you wait. Sooner or later, she will make Alvina Miller pay for her defeat." Originally, Kelly had planned to visit Joseph Grant's house for a few days, but the end of the year was nearing, and she had to busy herself with all kinds of things at the end of the year. She couldn't find any time, and could only decide after this year to see if there were any better opportunities. The office began to display a few words and symbols of the New Year's joy, a scene filled with joyous celebration. Olivia could have taken a break, but she insisted on working. Unfortunately, she thought she would have had a lot of chances to get close to Joseph Grant, and only in the end did she realize that her chances were pitifully small. Finally, the National Literature team had a large performance party tomorrow night, and both Joseph Grant and the president would be there. As the guest that was invited, Olivia was of course have a seat. The year was coming to an end, and one by one, the various events began to take place. The National Arts Council represented the country and often went abroad to perform, and the president arranged this performance in order to reward the envoys of the various departments who worked hard all year round. Kelly's job was to help receive guests and provide various services at the venue. Receiving this job, she was extremely happy, because she finally had the chance to look at Joseph Grant up close, and maybe she would even find a chance to confess to him. Alvina Miller was sitting in her office when she suddenly heard two qualified personnel chatting beside him. "I think we're on the list." "Really? That's great. There are only 5 spots in our department. Other than the leaders, we have the most experience. so we will definitely have the chance to go watch. Alvina Miller raised her head and looked at them. One of the big sister reached out and patted her shoulder to comfort her. Alvina, work hard. You will have a chance. Yes, I will work hard. Alvina Miller had to say that she was very envious of being able to enter the National Theater to watch a performance. Sigh. Joseph Grant had to go. It was a pity that she was a newcomer and not even her place was up in the rankings. Unless Joseph Grant could secretly arrange for her to enter. That still wouldn't do. He couldn't use his power for personal gain. If he did, he would be seen as a joke by others. Just as Alvina Miller was thinking about this, suddenly, the big sister who was chatting by the side swept her eyes over the list again, and finally said with a face full of joy, "There's a new list at the bottom. Anyone who enters within 3 months can get a ticket by draw. Alvina, you're here." Alvina Miller squinted her eyes. Sure enough, she saw her name in the crowd. "Why would I be here?" Alvina Miller had an expression of disbelief. "You're lucky. I heard that among the 100 new people, only 6 additional tickets were drew, and you were drawn." Big Sis laughed beside her. Chapter 1317, Stolen Joy. Alvina Miller felt that it was not that she was lucky, but someone had opened the door for her behind her back. Then there was no need to guess who this person was. When Alvina Miller thought about the embarrassing state she had when she had teased him last night, she could not help but raise the corner of her mouth and laugh secretly. The solemn Mr. Vice President. What kind of attitude did he have to arrange this? It must be true love. Kelly also saw the name list, but when she saw that among the 6 new entrants, there was Alvina Miller, her mind buzzed. Alvina Miller was probably going through the back door again. She was going to attend tomorrow's party to be a staff member. Maybe she would even have to bring some tea for Alvina Miller. Thinking about it, how could Kelly be willing to let go of her grievances? Kelly had always thought that apart from her family's background, Alvina Miller didn't have any special abilities either. The reason why she was proficient in many languages was also because her family members were willing to spend money at her to study, which couldn't prove how smart and capable she was. If it was her, she would have had the chance to learn. A few of her colleagues beside were also discussing how Alvina Miller would be a good guest participating in tomorrow's party. All of them had envious expressions on their faces. Benson also had a chance to go, so when he saw that Alvina Miller was on the list that was made public, the corners of his mouth hooked up into a smile. His understanding of Alvina Miller over the past few days could be considered to be within his plans. He knew that women didn't like men who brought goals to approach them. Benson's approach was like a gentle breeze and drizzling rain, nourishing their relationship bit by bit. Alvina Miller was unable to perceive it, so she naturally did not particularly reject. Benson stared at the young man who was speaking on the big screen in front of him. Fury flitted past his eyes. Back then, because of a mistake, he was demoted from a diplomat to become an administrator in the Public Information Department, which made him feel really wronged. He had struggled for more than 20 years, but in the end, all of this had happened because of Joseph Grant. Now, he had a chance to cuckold him, so of course he wouldn't miss it. If Alvina Miller fell in love with him, what kind of expression would Joseph Grant have? Must be interesting. The news that Benson received was that Joseph Grant was especially cold towards her, and Alvina Miller didn't seem to have any good impression of him either. The two of them were linked by the interests of their families. In terms of relationship, they didn't have any, so Benson was that confident that as long as he spent a little more effort, he would definitely be able to get Alvina Miller in. Thinking that she was the young mistress of a wealthy family, if he could really marry her, then even if he gave up his position, his future prospects would still be bright. Thinking about it, Benson had the thought of getting to know Alvina Miller more. In the afternoon, in the cafeteria, Alvina Miller's current companions were all some of the anti-grade colleagues in the archives, and all of them had families and children. Naturally, they took extra care of a young girl like Alvina Miller. "Alvina, your family must be very rich," an aunt asked her with a smile while they were eating. "No, not much." Alvina Miller immediately shook her head and laughed dryly. "Do you have a boyfriend?" the aunt continued. Alvina Miller blinked her eyes. "Why do you ask this?" Her head hurt the most. "Yes." Alvina Miller hesitated to answer. The aunt immediately looked disappointed. "I have a nephew who just came back from abroad. His family background is not bad too. I wanted to introduce him to you." Another young lady by the side immediately lowered her voice and asked Alvina Miller, "I heard that you and the Lieutenant Hilton by Vice President's side are a couple. Is that true?" Alvina Miller's mind twitched, and immediately started to fake a smile. "Who told you this? That must not be true. I am only acquainted with the Lieutenant Hilton. Truly, I am not lying to you all." So many women love to gossip. Alvina Miller already knew that she was at the center of the storm. She really wanted to escape. However, she couldn't escape, because they still had to work together. In the afternoon, Alvina Miller was resting on the table, planning to sleep for a while, when, suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. She immediately raised her head and saw Joseph Grant bringing his two aides as he walked past her window. People who passed by greeted him respectfully, and he also responded with a smile. When Alvina Miller raised her eyes to look at him, he turned his head to look at her, and smiled. Alvina Miller's breath tightened. "Damn it. Please stop releasing your charm." Joseph Grant held onto his pockets and walked over quickly. His elegant and refined temperament made it hard for people to shift their eyes away. Alvina Miller suddenly stood up. Could she make up an excuse to send the coffee and tea over to the library? Alvina Miller woke up from her slumber at that moment. She saw that some of her colleagues had seized every moment to rest, so no one noticed her. She slipped into the tea room and brewed 3 cups of coffee and a pot of tea, intending to head towards the library. Unexpectedly, this move of hers, which did not wake her colleagues in the office, was seen by Kelly, who had followed over from not too far away. Kelly knew that at around 1 p.m., Joseph Grant would be resting while reading in the library. Therefore, she bravely came over just to find a chance to be with him alone, so she could confess. However, to her surprise, there was a person who was even more enthusiastic than she was as she entered the library with a cup of tea. Alvina Miller. Kelly could not help but clench her teeth, both her hands clenched into fists. Kelly found it hard to believe. Her thoughts were simple, as though she was not interested in any man at all. But now, she had sneakily given Mr. Vice President a cup of tea. Kelly did not know where she got the courage from, but she walked forward even faster, almost to the point of reaching the library. She anxiously looked inside, only to see that Alvina Miller was standing beside the table and the chairs of the library, smiling and chatting with Lieutenant Hilton. Kelly was startled. Could it be that Alvina Miller did not send in the tea to seduce Joseph Grant, just looking for a chance to talk to her boyfriend? Kelly had always believed that Alvina Miller and Lieutenant Hilton were a pair, but now the grievances in her heart had dispersed. If it was just to take the chance to see her boyfriend Lieutenant Hilton, Kelly wouldn't hate her. When Alvina Miller came in, she happened to be with Lieutenant Hilton. She placed the coffee and tea on the table, and the Lieutenant Hilton politely reached out her hand to help her. That was why Kelly felt that Alvina Miller had a good relationship with Lieutenant Hilton. Kelly did not dare to stay, and quickly left. At this time, Alvina Miller placed the tray down, brought a cup of coffee, and walked towards the bookshelves. In the fifth shelf hallway, she saw Joseph Grant leaning on the shelf, seriously flipping through the books in his hands. "Joseph Grant," Alvina Miller called out to him in a low voice. Joseph Grant was startled. He raised his eyes and looked at her, then smiled. "Why are you here?" "I snuck over." As Alvina Miller said this, she looked to the side like a thief. "Stop looking. No one will come here at this point." Joseph Grant comforted her with a light smile. Because no one wanted to see Mr. Vice President's expression at this time, everyone still wanted to keep a stable job. Only Alvina Miller was the bravest, daring to barge in at this time. "Coffee for you." Alvina Miller passed it to him. Joseph Grant looked at the thick black coffee, and extended his hand to take it. "You can make coffee." Well, the two aides tasted it just now. They said that it was all right, Alvina Miller said somewhat complacently. "Then I will try." Joseph Grant frowned. He lowered his head and drank his coffee, and almost vomited. The taste was indescribable. It was really hard on his two aides. They actually had to face such a bitter cup of coffee and say a few words. "How is it?" Alvina Miller looked at him with a begging look for praise. "Well, not bad indeed." Joseph Grant praised her while covering up his conscience. "In the future, all of you can come here to read. I'll make you coffee every day." "Alvina, are you not going to rest at noon?" When Joseph Grant heard her say that she would make him coffee every day, he immediately interrupted her words. "I don't need to rest at noon. I just need a cup of tea in the afternoon." Alvina Miller immediately answered with a smile. "Then don't come here every day. We have to keep a low profile." While Joseph Grant was speaking, he lowered his head and took another sip. Chapter 1318, Unexpected Discovery. Only then did Alvina Miller remember that she and Joseph Grant could not meet in the executive office in private. If other people saw them, the consequences would be unpredictable. Thus, she immediately became spirited, and quickly tiptoed and kissed Joseph Grant on his handsome face, then retreated step by step. "Then I will go back first." Joseph Grant was stunned as he saw the girl disappear into the distance. If it weren't for the bitter coffee in his hand, he wondered if he'd been dreaming when he saw her. The man's thin lips couldn't help but twitch. The bitter coffee that he had just tasted had unknowingly tasted better. Joseph Grant stayed in the library until 2:30 when he left. When the two aides saw the empty cup of coffee in his hands, their expressions were filled with horror, thinking about how they had worked so hard and had only drank half of the cup. "Yet, sir, who is so picky about coffee?" had finished it without adding sugar or milk. Why? Seeing their strange expressions, Joseph Grant asked with a low voice. No, nothing. Miss Miller is really warm-hearted, even sending us coffee. Lieutenant Hilton immediately revealed his 8 teeth and smiled gratefully. Joseph Grant could not help but laugh out loud. The little woman had already tortured him enough, and had also tortured his 2 aides to a miserable state. But wasn't it where her loveliness was interesting? When Alvina Miller returned to the office, seeing that everyone was still taking their afternoon nap, she decided to rest for a while. In the afternoon, when she went to the tea room to make tea, she caught a whiff of strong coffee and immediately held her head up to look at the coffee her colleague had made. There was even a fine layer of white foam on it. Wow, it smells so good. Alvina Miller, a person who didn't like drinking coffee, found the taste good as well. Would you like one too? Her colleague asked her kindly. Sure. Alvina Miller also wanted to repay the aroma of the coffee. When her colleague showed her the process of the coffee, Alvina Miller revealed a surprised expression. Didn't you add a spoonful of coffee beans to the coffee? There's no need for so much. Half a spoonful is enough. It's too strong and the bitter taste is heavy, her colleague answered with a smile. Alvina Miller's beautiful eyes widened in shock. It's over. She made 3 cups of coffee today, and added 3 spoonfuls to it. Wouldn't it be too bitter to death? After the coffee was brewed, the colleague had a small spoon filled with sugar and cream. She immediately smacked her forehead with her hand. She was so anxious to make coffee at noon that she forgot to add sugar and cream. Wouldn't that make things more difficult? Alvina, what's wrong? Try it. Seeing her surprised expression, her colleague immediately laughed. Thank you. Alvina Miller received the coffee with both hands, lowered her head and took a sip. The taste is not bad. Her colleague nodded and said somewhat proudly, I often drink coffee and have learnt all sorts of cooking methods. Hearing that, Alvina Miller hurriedly asked humbly, Big sister, can you teach me? I like to drink coffee too. It can't be that you like to drink it, right? From what I see, you haven't drunk it before. Do you want to make it for that person of yours? The warm-hearted elder sister was able to see through her thoughts. Alvina Miller chuckled. Big Sis's eyes are truly sharp. I can't even hide this little trick of mine. Alvina, you're so cute. Whoever marries you, their life will be very interesting. All right. Since you help me at work every day, I'll teach you for free. The lady nodded earnestly and agreed. Alvina Miller was quite popular in the archive room, because she was very diligent. Furthermore, she was very good at helping others, which made people have good impression on her. Alvina Miller grinned. Next time, she must make Joseph Grant a cup of delicious coffee to repay him. In the villa of Wilson family, the lights were all slightly pale. The old lady was sitting alone in the old man's room, arranging the inheritance for him. The old man's will was also made public by his lawyer. 30% of the ownership was given to his 3 grandsons. He did not have any favoritism. Everyone had 10% of the share. Dempsey Wilson pushed the door and entered. Seeing his grandmother sitting alone by the window and looking out at the pitch black night, he felt his heart was in a mess. He immediately walked over to comfort her. Grandmother, the funeral will be tomorrow. Don't be too sad. Dempsey Wilson reached out and gently hugged his granny. I won't be sad anymore. Your grandfather said before that he won't go too far because he's still waiting for me. The old lady said with a smile. Dempsey Wilson's eyes reddened. and he felt like crying. All right, during this period of time, the atmosphere in our family is too sad. The two little fellows clearly haven't experienced this kind of thing, so don't scare them. Tomorrow, after the funeral of your grandfather, we should move on. It was as if the old lady had decided to turn over the page, because no matter who she wanted to hate, she couldn't. The person who had done this to her was her own son, and he was also bearing the burden of his crimes. All right, as long as grandmother doesn't mention it, we won't mention it again. Dempsey Wilson nodded. The two little fellows had indeed been a little scared during the past 2 days. Perhaps it was because they were too young, but they were always filled with fear towards unknown things. Claire's heart was also heavy. Even though she didn't interact much with the old man, she knew that he was an elder worthy of respect. She also knew even more how much of an impact he had had on Dempsey Wilson. Is Grandma still sad? Claire asked Dempsey Wilson in a soft voice as she watched Dempsey Wilson walk in. Yes, even though Grandmother said that she won't be sad, she will definitely feel sad in her heart. As Dempsey Wilson said that, he took off his jacket, which Claire took and hung on a hanger at the side. Your grandfather died too suddenly. No one was prepared, Claire sighed. Dempsey Wilson's handsome face was filled with sorrow. He suddenly reached out and hugged Claire, and leaned his head on her hair. Claire, I feel very guilty. Grandfather only died because of me. Claire knew that Dempsey Wilson was suppressing this matter in his heart. Although he did not mention it to anyone, this invisible pressure still made him sad every day. Claire didn't know how to comfort him. She had said too many comforting words, but at this moment, she didn't know what else to say. She could only extend her hand and gently stroke the man's hair, allowing him to lean on. In the dark of the night, on the big bed, Claire discovered that Dempsey Wilson liked to sleep in her embrace these 2 nights. He was like an injured child and needed someone to comfort him. Claire also felt a lot of heartache for him, and she didn't know when he would be able to walk out of this shadow. Jack Wilson sat alone in the dark room. This room was where his father, John Wilson, once lived. Suddenly, his hand was placed on a small counter beside him. He had been looking for cigarettes and a lighter, but he seemed to have overturned a wooden box on the counter. Something had been dumped on the floor. Jack Wilson frowned. He extended his hand and turned on the light, and saw that there were a few photos and a small book scattered on the floor. He froze for a moment before squatting down and picking up the photos one by one. They were actually all of her sister Jane Wilson, a total of 5 of them, with 2 of them having turned completely yellow. It could be seen that they were taken when Jane Wilson was first brought home. The last one was a photo of herself taking a photo of her not long before she passed away. There was even John Wilson in the picture. In such a sorrowful moment, looking at the photo of his loved ones, Jack Wilson's feelings became even more complicated and extremely sad. It must be because Dad missed his little sister so much that he collected her pictures in this box so they could be viewed at any time. Jack Wilson thought like this as he reached out to pick up the notebook. It was small and square, and he thought that it was his father's diary, which probably contained his feelings for his sister. However, when he flipped to the next page, his entire body felt as if it had fallen into an ice house. It was so cold that all the blood in his body froze. This was John Wilson's diary. He recorded all of his thoughts after Jane Wilson betrayed him, and also recorded how he disguised Jane Wilson's death to look like an accident. He didn't even let the police investigate this matter, so he treated everything as an accident. Jack Wilson's entire body was trembling. He never thought that his father would be the one to kill his sister, which was like a thunderbolt out of the sky. Chapter 1319. Are you worse than me? Jack Wilson was like a statue as he sat on the floor. The notebook in his hands was tightly grasped in his hands and had already become deformed. He really did not think that his father would be so cold-blooded to cause his daughter, who he raised up, to die so heartlessly. If he was not his own son, would he end up like his little sister, not even knowing how he died? When he thought about the day that Jane Wilson was buried, when his father stood in front of her grave and cried for a long time, Jack Wilson felt that all of this was fake, and even his life seemed to have been twisted. He was unable to differentiate between the true feelings, and if he could erase his familial feelings, then who would he trust? Amelia Miller opened the door, holding onto two bags that she bought from the supermarket in her hands. Her two slender and small hands were strangled red, showing just how heavy her things were. She felt that Jack Wilson was not in a good mood these few days, but when she asked him, he did not say a word. Amelia Miller was still very worried for him. Thus, she immediately returned after class, wanting to cook dinner for him. She saw that there was a light in the bedroom, so she walked over with light steps. Seeing the man sitting on the ground, Amelia Miller's expression froze, and she immediately asked in a soft voice, "Jack, why are you sitting on the ground? It's so cold." Furthermore, she realized that not only was Jack Wilson sitting on the floor, he was also wearing a thin, gray, turtleneck sweater. "Get out. Don't worry about me." Jack Wilson started to doubt life. His heart seemed to have been distorted by others. He could no longer tell if it was real or fake, and felt that there was no longer any kind of emotion in this world that was worth him giving up. Amelia Miller was stunned for a moment. She heard the indifference in Jack Wilson's voice and stood in place, not knowing what to do. "What happened to you? You can tell me." "Tell you what? Who are you to me?" "Amelia Miller, go out." Jack Wilson growled angrily. Amelia Miller's entire body trembled. Her beautiful eyes instantly opened wide. The man who hugged her a few days ago, saying that he wanted to be her boyfriend, now it was as though he had changed. His personality had also changed. These few days he had been quiet, and he did not seem to be in any of the corners, as though he had experienced a huge blow in his life. Amelia Miller was not able to contact the upper class, so she did not know that old man of Wilson family had passed away and did not know that all of this was caused by his father, John Wilson. It was as if she was living in two different worlds unlike him, leading the most everyday and simplest days of life. All right, Amelia Miller was a very knowledgeable and tactful girl. She would seriously listen to everything Jack Wilson said, and wouldn't give him any pressure. When he saw her enter, she had disturbed his grief. Furthermore, with how miserable he was acting, he did not want anyone to see him, which was why he was able to anger her and let her out. However, he did not expect that she had actually left. When the door closed, the last thing inside Jack Wilson's heart seemed to have disappeared. It was all empty. He turned his head and looked at the door that the girl had lightly closed, and suddenly crawled up from the ground. In the next second, he opened the door, and saw that Amelia Miller did not leave with her bag, but had opened her shopping bag. In her hand was a cabbage and a fish, as if she was preparing to cook dinner for him. When Amelia Miller heard the door behind her forcefully opened, she was shocked. She looked at him in a daze, as if she had forgotten that she was holding onto a half-dead fish. The two of them looked at each other across the living room, unable to understand each other's emotions. "Can we have some fish tonight?" Only when the fish in Amelia Miller's hand wagged its tail to prove its existence did Amelia Miller jump in fright. Her voice carefully sounded to ask. Jack Wilson's eyes were red, tears still flowing down his face that he could not suppress. Hearing her simple question, he subconsciously nodded. "Okay." Amelia Miller heaved a sigh of relief, took the food and went straight to the kitchen. Jack Wilson weakly leaned on the door, both of his hands supporting his face. Dragging his heavy body, he entered the bathroom. In the mirror was the man whose stubble had all appeared. Was he really him? In the past, he paid the most attention to his image. He wanted to change clothes, shoes and socks every day. But now, he had already worn this set of clothes for 3 days. The short hair that he used to take care of was also messy like a chicken's nest. "She doesn't dislike me like this." He was just like a mentally ill patient these few days, and from time to time, he would even lose his temper. Even he hated himself for behaving like this. But she did not leave, and instead she would return at noon to cook for him. Even if he did not eat, she would definitely call him over. Jack Wilson touched the stubble on his beard, and finally decided to change his face. When he took a shower, checked his face and hair clean before coming out, Amelia Miller was actually shocked. She could not help but worriedly ask him, "Are you going out?" "No, I just thought of one thing." Jack Wilson shook his head and started to mock himself. Amelia Miller was startled. "What are you thinking about?" "My dad is a complete bastard. He deserves to die. Even if he dies 1,000 or 10,000 times, it wouldn't be enough." Jack Wilson gritted his teeth and cursing to the point that Amelia Miller was confused. Jack Wilson painfully covered his face as if he had no face to see her again. "Did you know? Just a few days ago, my father forced my grandfather to commit suicide." How Amelia Miller's entire body trembled as she could not believe that such a serious thing had happened to him. "I really don't want to accept this, but it's all true. Just now, I saw my father's diary and he disguised my sister's death as an accident and killed her." Jack Wilson completely shared the pain in his heart, and his eyes once again completely red. Amelia Miller's breath tightened and found it hard to believe that there really was someone worse off than herself in this world. "From now on, I'm really alone. I don't have the face to see my grandmother anymore. I can only live by myself." Jack Wilson endured the grief in his heart, but he still shed tears as he sobbed. This was the first time Amelia Miller saw a man cry. It was also the type of cry that sounded like a child's cry. Amelia Miller was still holding onto the kitchen knife to cut the vegetables, but at this moment, she was stunned into a wooden sculpture. She quickly put down the kitchen knife, afraid that she would hear something even more shocking and shake it off. "Jack, I am sorry." Amelia Miller knew that there was no meaning in saying anything now. He had to endure this pain alone, until he was calm and peaceful. "Amelia, isn't my family scary? Are you not afraid of me?" Jack Wilson intentionally sent a gloomy face to scare her, wanting to see her true reaction. "I'm not afraid of you." Amelia Miller shook his head and said. Jack Wilson did not believe her, and coldly ridiculed her on purpose. "Are you already thinking in your heart about how to get as far away from me as possible?" Amelia Miller turned around and walked to the front of him. She was only as tall as a man's shoulder, so she raised her head and looked at him with her clear and divine eyes. You are the first man that has made me feel warmth. I will not leave you, unless you want to drive me away. What you said, is that true? Jack Wilson stared at her pair of beautiful eyes, a little suffocated, as he did not dare to believe her words. I swear, everything I've said to you is true. Amelia Miller raised her hand and gave a simple oath. Why aren't you afraid of my family? Jack Wilson found it laughable. However, Amelia Miller smirked. That's because I didn't bring you to my house to take a look. My house is much more chaotic than yours. I don't mean the chaos in the house. I mean my family. Jack Wilson frowned. My family relationship isn't simple either. Amelia Miller shrugged her shoulders, indicating that she could have been worse. Chapter 1320. Oath. Jack Wilson stared blankly at the little girl with a smile. Indeed, he had investigated on her growing up environment. If she had grown up in a family without love, her personality would definitely be very gloomy. But Amelia Miller didn't seem to be affected by her personality. She was still like an innocent child sometimes, with a pure heart, and the only difference was the sadness written on her face when she faced her father's endless demands for money. She could get over this matter, but why was he holding on to it so tightly? Moreover, he was still a man. What reason did he have to be half dead? Amelia Jack Wilson reached out to hug her tightly, then leaned into her ear and apologized in a low voice. I shouldn't have been so fierce towards you just now, but it was my fault. I wasn't able to control my temper. Amelia Miller had already understood what kind of man Jack Wilson was. Although he seemed cold and arrogant, he was willing to let go of his pride for the majority of the time. I know you're not in a good mood, but I can't comfort you. If you're dissatisfied, it's good to let off some anger. Amelia Miller said with a sigh. Aren't you angry with me? Jack Wilson released her hand, placed both of his hands on her shoulders, and nervously looked at her expression and asked. Amelia Miller shook his head. No, I know you are not a person who likes to throw a tantrum. You just met with trouble. Jack Wilson nodded his head. Amelia, my mood is much better now. I want to beg you for a favor. What is it? Amelia Miller's beautiful eyes widened in astonishment. I want you to accompany me to my grandfather's funeral tomorrow. Jack Wilson pleaded in a low voice. How Amelia Miller had thought that he was begging for something else, but she didn't expect that he had actually decided to bring her to see his family, and furthermore, it was to suddenly appear at his grandfather's funeral. Scared, Jack Wilson's eyes dimmed, thinking that she did not want to accompany him. Amelia Miller bit her lips and said softly, everyone from your family will be there. If I go with you, will I be able to see them? Yes, you will meet them, but I really want to bring you to meet my grandfather. Even if it's too late, I still want you to accompany me to Kowtow. Jack Wilson leaned against a wall on the side. Actually, 2 days before grandfather's accident, Jack Wilson had already prepared to bring Amelia Miller to meet her grandfather and grandmother, and wanted to invite the two elders over for a meal so they could see his future wife. He didn't think that his grandfather would leave just like that after things happened so suddenly. He truly felt upset in his heart. All right, I will go. Amelia Miller could tell that he was very sad. and did not want to make him upset again. Jack Wilson gazed down, and his gaze focused on her face. He lightly swiped his finger across her cheek. Amelia, it's definitely because I've used all of my luck in my life to meet you. Amelia Miller was startled. Following that, her face flushed red. If what happened that day in the hotel could be considered as a kind of meeting, then she really didn't want to have to do it again. Jack Wilson was also startled, as if he had mentioned something that he shouldn't have. He couldn't help but let out a light cough. You cook. I'll go clean up the room. All right. Seeing that he had finally recovered his previous state, Amelia Miller's mood calmed down. Early morning the next day, old Wilson's funeral was held around 10 in the morning. Halfway up the mountain to the east of the cemetery, he chose the best cemetery. It was beautifully constructed and was a rare feng shui treasure. Aside from his family, the ones who came to see him off were his friends. At his age, there weren't many friends, and most of them had gray hair. However, they still carried their walking sticks and came trembling to send their old friend off on his final journey. Everyone was dressed in the same black, and it was snowing. Old Wilson's friends were all brought here by their families as escorts, and at this moment, an umbrella was held up by Dempsey Wilson's bodyguards above the elderly's head. Claire and Lorena held the child in one hand, and some people helped them to hold the umbrella. Standing beside Joshua Wilson was Elizabeth Jones. Her lower abdomen moved slightly, and it was unknown if it was because of the sadness in her heart, causing her to feel that at this moment, the baby in her womb was moving so strongly, causing her eyes to become inexplicably red. Could it be that even the unborn baby could feel the sad atmosphere? Dempsey Wilson and the old granny stood at the very front. The old man had already put down the coffin and was covering the earth when everyone's mood suddenly became much gloomier. Just then, another two figures walked over from the stairs. They were Jack Wilson and Amelia Miller. The moment Joshua Wilson saw him, his face turned black from anger. The old lady turned around and looked at Jack Wilson, then waved her hand at him. Jack Wilson lowered his head and walked over, and said sorrowfully, "Sorry, Grandma, I came late. As long as you remember, it's fine. Otherwise, this might be the regret in your life." The old lady was still gratified. She was worried that Jack Wilson would leave this big family and have nothing to do with her from now on. That was the result that she didn't want to see the most. She believed that the old man didn't want the brothers to get separated. "I know." Jack Wilson nodded. The old lady suddenly looked at the girl beside him and asked, "Who is she?" Jack Wilson said hoarsely, "My girlfriend, Amelia Miller. I want to bring her along to send grandfather off." "That's great. If your grandfather in the underworld knows this, he will definitely be happy for you." When the old lady heard that Jack Wilson had finally found a girlfriend, her heart was filled with complex emotions. However, to hear such a happy thing at this moment was also something to be happy about. "I hope Grandpa will like my future wife." Jack Wilson forced a smile. Dempsey Wilson's gaze slightly changed. When he heard that Jack Wilson had admitted that he was Amelia Miller's girlfriend, he was truly surprised. Back then, he had also investigated the relationship between Amelia Miller and Jack Wilson and planned to find Amelia Miller to prove it. However, Amelia Miller seemed to be very protective of Jack Wilson, and now, it seemed that it was because they were already in love. "Your grandfather has too many lingering feelings for you. He hasn't seen the Josh's child, and he hasn't seen your girlfriends either. Don't worry, I will tell him in my dreams." The old lady let out a long sigh and greeted the heavy moment with a smile. Snow began to fall on the group of people. It wasn't until they had kowtowed and bowed that a portion of the elderly finally left. The old granny let Claire and Lorena bring the children away, while Amelia Miller and Elizabeth Jones followed them into the car. At this moment, only the old lady and Wilson family's 3 grandsons remained in front of the tomb. The old lady's slightly bent body seemed to become thinner and thinner. Standing beside her were 3 tall and straight young men. Although they were tall, they still lowered their heads in front of their elders, trying their best to bend down a little. "Now that your grandfather's affairs have been settled, let's take a look at the future. Life is unpredictable, so don't be too serious. You 3, kneel before your grandfather's grave and swear that from today onwards, there will be no more fights, no more relatives to kill. If anyone breaks this oath, your grandfather and I will never rest on the ground in peace." The old lady took her walking stick and heavily knocked it on the ground a few times. She was alerting the group of youngsters that they were a harmonious family. Only then would everything flourish. Without saying a word, the 3 men kneeled down, and Dempsey Wilson swore an oath on the spot, followed by Joshua Wilson and Jack Wilson. The old lady stood at the side and watched, sighing in satisfaction. "All right, you can all go back now. If you have time in the future, come visit me again." "Grandmother, I want to stay here alone for a while longer," Jack Wilson said in a low voice. Dempsey Wilson and Joshua Wilson supported the old lady and planned to leave. "Fine, you can stay here for a while. Pick a day. Bring your girlfriend over for dinner." The old lady's hands and feet were ice cold, and she was on the verge of fainting. Suppressing the grief in her heart was also a serious injury to her body. "Yes, grandmother," Jack Wilson answered firmly in a low voice.